About 20 years ago, when I was still full-time in the ministry, I belonged to a group of 6 ministers. And we used to meet twice a year and try to help one another. And we made a commitment to pray for one of the others every single day of the year. The only time I think I've ever succeeded in doing something as systematically and faithfully as I did that. We had a roster so that every week I had one of those chaps to pray for. Now, how do you pray for someone every day and the prayers not get boring and repetitive? We were far too busy in the ministry to phone each other and ask for prayer requests every day. We didn't do that. How on earth do you keep those prayers interesting and alive and not boring? Because if you just say, God bless Gavin every day, that gets very thin. And so how do you do it? Well, the way we did it, and it worked wonderfully, was a chap called Gavin bought 6 of these little books and gave one to each of us. It's called Praying with the Psalms by Eugene Peterson. What he's done is he's taken the Psalms and divided them into 365 readings. That's an average of about 7 or 8 verses a day. And so we did that. And the agreement was we'd read them verse by verse, and whatever that verse said, I prayed for the other guy. Now, some of them that's not so easy, and I'll explain over the next 2 weeks how to do that. And I would pray it for myself as well. And that way, the prayers remain interesting, alive, different, varied, all the time. And I want to invite you just this week to start at Psalm 1 and take 6 to 10 verses at a time and pray them for yourself and pray them for somebody else, just for 7 days. See if you can do that and see how it goes. It may work for you, it may not, and that's okay. And so that's what I want to invite you to do. Now, for the next 3 weeks, I want to preach on praying with the Psalms. And we will look at the whole 150 Psalms and learn some lessons out of them. This morning I want to look only at Psalm 1. It's a short psalm, it's only 6 verses long. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Now look at the first couple of verses. The very first word of Psalm 1 and the very first word of the book of Psalms is the word blessed. There isn't actually an adequate English word to equate to that word blessed. What it means is to be truly, deeply happy and content, but that contentment is God-given. That's the word blessed. A God-given contentment and happiness. That's the first word of Psalm 1. That is what the Old Testament, the whole Bible, is all about, how to be blessed. And the intention of God, the intention of the Psalms, is for us to be deeply contented in God. A wonderful thing. It's absolutely wrong to say that the Old Testament's all about law and gloom and doom. It's not true. It's all about how to be deeply blessed by God. It's a sad thing that in the world there is a widespread belief that if I let God get too close to me, that will in some way deplete me, in some way make me less, take away life. And nothing could be further from the truth. To be close to God is to be blessed, deeply, deeply happy and satisfied. So blessed is the man. Which man? Well, the man who delights in the law of the Lord. You want to be deeply blessed? Delight in the law of the Lord. And notice how right up at the front the Psalms tie together the word delight and the word law. Now that word law even itself is actually a delightful word. In English, the law is rather a rigid kind of word, isn't it? But the word law, from which the word Torah comes from a Hebrew word that means to flow like a river. Now that's not something you associate with law, is it? To flow like a river. It's a beautiful word. And that is why the person who delights in the law will be like a tree planted by a river that never goes brown, never dies, and keeps bearing fruit. Why? Because the law is like a river that gives life. And so the combination of law and delight is a wonderful thing. Now, we were very fortunate to be in Israel a number of times, and we happened to be in Israel right over the Jewish New Year, which falls in September. And it happened that we had a weekend off that weekend, and so we got in our car and we went down into the Negev desert. Very nice experience. And we stayed in an Airbnb in a little village right in the middle of the desert. And our hostess was delightful. She showed us in. We got a nice room. And it was quite noisy that night because all friends and family had gathered together because it was Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. And we had a nice sleep, woke up in the morning. Just as we were having breakfast, there was a knock at the door, and our hostess came in. And in her hand, she said, "I have a gift for you. It's the traditional gift to give on New Year's Day." I wonder if you know what it was. It was a pomegranate. And of course, when you break open the pomegranate, it's full of these beautiful red seeds that are wonderfully sweet to the taste. And she told us why they give that on New Year's Day. The pomegranate happens to ripen in September. She said, "Our belief is that there are the same number of seeds in the pomegranate as there are laws and requirements in the Old Testament. About 633. Now, that's not exactly accurate. Pomegranates can vary greatly, but the average is about 633. And she said, "We don't regard the law," and their word for law is mitzvah, from which you get the word bar mitzvah. So when a boy becomes 13, he becomes bar mitzvah, a son of the law. And we regard the mitzvahs, the requirements of God, as sweet. Because when you eat them, when you observe them, you get sweetness into your life. There's the idea again of the combination of law and delight. Lovely image. And she gave us this pomegranate, and we so enjoyed every one of those 633 seeds. Something else interesting about the pomegranate is if you leave it, it starts to turn black. And they take the juice from that blackness and they mix it as an essential ingredient in ink. And the juice from the pomegranate makes that ink indelible. That is the ink they used to write the law of the Lord. And the image is it's sweet to the taste, but it's indelible. It will never change. It's always the same. And it doesn't matter what the world around says to us. The law of the Lord never changes. It's as sweet as honey, and it's the only way to deep blessing. And so the law of the Lord. And so a man who wants blessing, a woman who wants blessing, delights in the law of the Lord. And then it goes on to say, and in that law he or she meditates day and night. Now, how do you meditate on the law, on the Word of God day and night? I mean, I can't. I've got to get on with my job. Like right now, when I'm preaching to you, my whole mind is concentrated on what I'm saying to you. You've got your job to do, and while you're doing it, your mind is concentrated. But at the back of your mind, just quietly running, is the Word of the Lord. And when you come to any moment of decision, how you talk to someone, whatever it may be, just running in the back of your mind is the law of the Lord. how would God want this done? What would Jesus do? And the law of the Lord quietly runs in the background, and so you're meditating on the Lord day and night. But every day we need to bring that to the front of our consciousness, where we concentrate on the law of the Lord. Now, I was brought up on a little saying, you must have a quiet time every day. That never quite worked for me. It became actually a matter of guilt. I didn't manage it, and then because I was guilty, I would miss another day, and so it often didn't work for me. Nevertheless, there's truth in it. Now, when I was in, I suppose, only about 40, quite a young man, I was having quite bad back trouble. So I went to the doctor. The doctor was a Christian man, and he knew that I was a minister. And so he examined me and this and that, and he had some x-rays done. And then he said to me, Pastor, do you do exercises? And I gave this answer, when I think of it. And he looked at me and said, is that how you do your religion? And that was a very penetrating question. Do I meditate on the law of the Lord when I think of it? Because I can tell you, I've learned down since those days, if I stop my back exercises for anything more than 10 days, my back trouble comes back. I can't stop. I don't just do it when I think of it, because I know it doesn't pay. And so with meditating on the law of the Lord, every day didn't work for me, but I did read a survey recently. I don't know how accurate or authoritative it is, but it strikes me. The survey was, they say they did of 40,000 Christians, people who read the law of the Lord or came to church once a week. They could not find any measurable difference in their life from doing that. Twice a week, nothing. 3 times a week, they said just a little blip on the radar of having an impact on their life. Here's the thing I found really interesting. 4 days a week, suddenly it was showing. It's a little more than every second day. People who were exposed to the word of the Lord, however it was, in church or in their own, in their quiet time, 4 days a week, it made a big difference to their living. And so, how do you know blessing? Well, you delight in the law of the Lord, and you meditate on it all the time in the background, and I think at least 4 times a week consciously for 15 or 20 minutes. But there are also things I must not do, and they're listed in the psalm. I must not walk in the counsel of the ungodly. I must not stand in the way of sinners. I must not sit in the seat of the scoffers. You notice there's a progression there. Walks, stands, sits. If I'm very comfortable, we sit down. And I spend time with you. Now, I'm not saying don't sit down with people who are not following the Lord. I'm not saying that. I'm saying be very careful that you're not getting comfortable with their ungodly points of view. It comes in, we imbibe it, and we have to guard very carefully against that. So there are positives and negatives. Now that's what I want to end talking about, is positives and negatives. Even in Psalm 1, there are both. For example, look at verse 1, talks about the blessed man. Verse 2 talks about the ungodly man. There it is, positive and negative, right at the beginning of Psalm 1. Now, I want to say a few words about that word negative. You notice I put it in inverted commas. What I mean by that is, for example, anger and grief, which are 2 very big negative words, are not negative in themselves. Now I want to show you the whole of Psalm chapter 1 and how it's balanced between positive and negative. To make it easier, I'm coloring the positive words in green and the negative words in pink. And look at that. Psalm 1 is almost 50-50 positive and negative. Almost exactly. God is saying that's how life is. Life is full of positives and negatives. And I want you to get used to that idea. As we go through the Psalms next 2 weeks, we're going to have a look at that balance because it's not often 50-50. It varies quite a lot. And I think it varies in ways that are very useful to us. And we will look at those. It's not usually 50-50. But what God is saying is, life is full of positives and negatives. That's how it is. This world is in a major struggle between good and evil. And that's how it is. And if you don't acknowledge that, you're not going to be able to cope with this world. There are forces at play, and the whole book of Revelation is about that. I need to acknowledge that I'm in the middle of a struggle. The Lord's Prayer begins with, Our Father in heaven. That's positive, right? But it ends with, keep us from the evil one. I come into praise, I go out to battle. And so I need to grasp, life is full of positives and negatives. The world is in the grip of a battle between good and evil. And it's a battle to the death. And life is full of joy and pain. Not always in a nice 50-50 balance. There are some people who are given a much bigger measure of pain. There are some very lucky people who are given a much bigger measure of joy. But there's no one who hasn't got a combination of both. Life is like that. There's joy and there's pain. Jesus' life was like that. He was called a man of sorrows. Now, there are two movies that really have taken my attention in this, that were made about Jesus. The one, terribly well known, of course, is The Passion of the Christ. The word passion means the suffering. And my word, did that movie indicate and demonstrate the suffering of Christ. There are some who think it overdid it. It's still portrayed to me this man of sorrows. And then there was another movie, interestingly made in South Africa, a lot of it at the Rhodes Memorial, on the Gospel of Matthew. And that one portrayed a smiling Jesus. And there were those who criticized that film. That Jesus smiles too much, they said. Well, in fact, if you want an accurate picture of Jesus, just put those two together. The smiling Jesus who said to his disciples just before he died, he said, I want my joy to be in you. We're told that because of the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And so our Jesus, a man of joy, a man of sorrow. Pain, joy.